On September 4th, 1995, the wrestling world changed forever when WCW debuted Monday Nitro to run head-to-head with the World Wrestling Federation's Monday Night Raw. Nitro had a pretty good run. They peaked in 1996 and 97 when they beat Raw in the ratings for a whopping 83 weeks, as many of you all know. But WCW was a victim of its own success, and within years, bad creative decision after bad creative decision in conjunction with what the Federation was doing on their own led to fans leaving in droves. By the end, Nitro was only pulling in low 2 ratings, the kind of numbers that Raw today could only dream about. The combination of WCW's poor numbers, their endless spending, their litany of active lawsuits, and Turner's new corporate direction led to TBS canceling WCW programming altogether. A lack of a home on TV ruined a planned purchase and overall reboot by Fusion Media, led by Eric Bischoff. In swoops the World Wrestling Federation, and on March 23, 2001, Vince McMahon buys WCW for about the amount of money he makes and the time it takes for him to go to the bathroom in 2021. When I first heard the news of WCW being bought out by the Federation, I was 16 years old at the time, and I found it on some website, some internet wrestling website or message board or something, and I saw that, and I don't know if I didn't believe it at the time, but it was just still really surreal to see that because, I didn't think that was a possible ending to this. I didn't think it was going to end with a company being bought out by the other. That just seemed like a foreign concept to me. I knew that WCW was on the downward slope with the numbers and the ratings and everything, and they're hemorrhaging money and whatnot, but it never occurred to me that WWF could actually buy the rights to WCW. And I think it was that moment that made me realize the power that the Federation had that time with the spending ability and what they were able to accomplish. And that was kind of the beginning of what you would see in the years to come when it came to them purchasing tape libraries and then kind of slowly building the foundation for what would become the network today. It was a really crazy time to be a wrestling fan because there were friends I had who were big WCW fans. Well, I was at that time more of a Federation guy, but it was definitely a weird thing to discuss with friends in high school because we talked about those dream matches and ultimately those things that for one reason or another didn't end up happening, but it was still just a bizarre time. It was exciting. And so on the Monday before WrestleMania 17, WCW presented the final episode of Nitro, and here's how it all went down. March 26, 2001, at the Boardwalk Beach Resort in Panama City, Florida. This show was nominated by Jesse Bia over at patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. About 1,000 people watched this show live. It earned a 3 rating, the highest Nitro had seen since September the previous year. I think what makes the final Nitro so memorable, besides what we see at the end of the show, which we'll get to, is the setting here. It's in an outdoor venue, it's on the beach, it's spring breakout 2001, the hotel balconies are full, it's a party, there's people drinking in bottomless drinks. It's only fitting that this is the location of the final Nitro, which really embraced kind of a party atmosphere and tried to embrace that college demographic. And I think that's what made WCW Nitro so compelling at its peak. And they were doing the Nitro parties and everything like that. So I think it's very appropriate that their final Nitro is on the beach in this party atmosphere. I will say that the hard cam placement at times is terrible because you get a lot of these wide shots of the open beach and the blackness in the distance and those wide open bleachers. The penultimate Nitro and the final Thunder before this episode were very weird because, they only had like 1, maybe 2 storylines they wanted to actually progress leading into Nitro the following week. They had no more pay-per-views, and for all intents and purposes, the people in WCW probably didn't know 1 week before if this was the final Nitro for good, if that reboot was going to happen or not, if they were going to find a home on television, because on the 23rd is when the sale actually went down. There might have been some rumblings in the days before that, but nobody really knew for sure. So there's a lot of just kind of like ambiguity and just wide openness with the penultimate Nitro and the last Thunder. The second to last Nitro, the big highlight is Eric Bischoff literally phoning it in to announce the final Nitro 1 week later. It'll be a night of champions. All 5 titles will be on the line, and former champions welcome to appear as well. And besides Sting, they don't. The biggest angle going on at this time is, who is the mystery attacker jumping the members of the Magnificent Seven? A lot of folks in the comment section of my Greed review were asking that very thing. So did they ever find out who the attacker was? No, they didn't. On the Nitro after Greed, it's kind of alluded to that Rick Steiner is the one who did it, but it's never confirmed. And beyond that, it's never addressed again. Also on that Nitro after Greed, they make good on the promise of Ric Flair kissing Dusty Rhodes' fat white ass, that being his white donkey. And you see Flair and Jarrett getting their faces rubbed into the donkey's butt. So that's what you see. That's the main event segment of the second to last Nitro. But why did Dusty end up eating another few dozen burritos in one sitting for the second night in a row if that was the case? Also, my favorite part of the penultimate Nitro is the cold open, because in the build-up to Greed, Scott Steiner kept calling DDP Diamond Dallas white trash, and so the cold open sees this panning shot of a trailer park, you hear taps being played, and this pained look on DDP's face is just blasted across the screen. I just love Steiner twisting the dagger into DDP a little more after that title defense. So with all that context out of the way, it's time for me to finally talk about the final Nitro, and what an opening. We see Vince McMahon on the set of Monday Night Raw in Cleveland going, imagine that, Vince McMahon on WCW television. He bought his competition. He bought WCW. What is the fate of WCW? The fate, the very fate of WCW is in my hands. What an opening address that Vince has here, and it sets the tone for the whole rest of the night. And I say that because get ready to see a lot of Vince McMahon, because not only is he himself in many segments on this show, his fingerprints are all over this, because even though the WCW crew is technically running things, the WWF creative team is the one who's doing a lot of the creative moves on this. There's a crew of WWF producers there, like Bruce Pritchard and Gerald Briscoe, and of course Shane McMahon is all there. They're there in Panama to oversee this final Nitro as they do the passing of the baton, so to speak, to the World Wrestling Federation. Tony Schiavone and Scott Hudson on commentary, and it's so weird to hear them refer to Mr. McMahon on camera like he's a new character now in this world of WCW. What a weird melding of worlds we're witnessing here. So like I mentioned, a lot of storylines were kiboshed in the week leading up to the final Nitro. So no more Magsev, no more heel CEO Ric Flair. Big babyface Ric Flair opens the show. He's the first one in the ring there. Cuts a great promo where he name drops a whole lot of wrestlers from the past, the NWA and the present of WCW. Flair asks, does Vince think he's going to hold Jack Briscoe, Dory Funk, Harley Race, the Road Warriors, Sting, Luger, the Steiners, Bagwell, Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat in the palm of his hands? Spoiler alert, yes he will. Flair then drops some trivia, mentions it was Vince McMahon's father who was on the NWA board of directors and voted for Flair to be world champion. Kayfabe, brother. He talks about the boys and the legacy of WCW, wraps it up by saying his greatest opponent was Sting and he's challenging him to a match tonight. It's a great speech delivered only the way that Ric Flair can deliver a speech like that. I think it's great how much passion you hear in Flair's voice, but the impact of that promo is deadened a bit because in so many interviews he's done after the final Nitro, he's just basically saying, I didn't mean a word of what I was saying there. I just couldn't wait for WCW to get closed down. It's really sad to hear how much of the joy and the love he felt for wrestling was sapped from his body by that point in 2001. And I think hearing him talk about that final promo, I mean, he puts on a great facade. You couldn't tell from watching that promo that he hated being there at the time, but Flair did his job very well. Time for your first match. It's title versus title as the WCW champion Scott Steiner takes on the US champion Booker T. Yeah, that's the opener for the final Nitro. As we saw at Greed, Booker T beat Scott's brother Rick to win the US title for the very first time, and the following night on Nitro challenged Scott in that title for title match on the Night of Champions. This on its own is a classic rivalry in the history of WCW, because even if you ignore their battles between Harlem Heat and the Steiner brothers, as singles wrestlers, these two feuded over the TV championship, the US championship, the world championship. It's just really gratifying to see these two close out the rivalry here on the final Nitro. It's a great example of two guys in a singles feud that goes for several years across all levels of the card, and in the case of their appearance in an episode of Charmed, across dimensions. Right away, this match is running at a different speed than what I've seen for most of Steiner's matches in this run. He throws Booker out of the ring, and that allows Madeja to slap Booker. Scott brings up the lead pipe and swings to the fences, but Booker gets out of the way. Scott with a belly-to-belly, and Booker kicks out. He flips out of a suplex and makes his comeback. Hits the ghetto blaster, does the spinneroonie and the side kick. The bookend attempt is countered, and Steiner almost scores the pinfall. Goes for a powerbomb, but Booker T takes a page from Kidman's playbook and flips out of it. Hits the bookend to win and become a double champion. A four-time world champ is Booker T. The ratings for these matches are going to be a little weird feeling because this is the first TV program I've done in the classic pay-per-view review segment, and also these matches are all very short. I'm going to give this one 2.5 stars out of 5, and it's something you'll hear me say a lot in this review. I wish this match could have gone on longer because this one is just over 5 minutes long. The longest match of the show is 7 minutes. So every match here is super short, and I feel that if they had more time to flesh this out, it could have been a much better match. But for the time they were given, I think it was a very enjoyable match in that 5-minute span. Seeing WCW ending with Booker T as their champion, I think is very great to see. Even though I wasn't watching as much WCW as I was the WWF during this time, I always enjoyed and appreciated Booker's work. I could tell how hard he was working, and I could appreciate how well he connected with the fans. I mean, think of that trajectory from 2000 onward. Harlem Heat breaks up. He has to feud with his brother and Ahmed Johnson and shit. He comes out from the depths as G.I. Bro, and then he becomes a 4-time world champion by the end of WCW's run. So kudos to Booker T for making it work. It's a spring breakout montage. Damn, suddenly I want to go to the beach and make a collect call and dial my modem with AOL. We see Vince McMahon sitting in his office, talking to his lawyer, presumably, and talking smack about Panama City. Your next match is a qualifying match to determine who will face Kid Romeo and Prime Time for the Cruiserweight tag titles later on, as the Young Dragons take on 3 Count and Rey Mysterio and Kidman. Busting out some big Cruiserweight moves to start things off. Great wheelbarrow into a facebuster by Evan Courageous. Rey jumps in on Yang and hits a beautiful senton to the outside. Courageous and Shannon Moore each taking turns to the outside. Then Kidman with the Kid Makazi onto everyone, landing face first on the floor. Yang with a great Phoenix splash on Rey, but the pin's broken up. Moore with the bottoms up, but this time Kaz connects with the kick, makes up for Super Brawl when he hit the referee. An ugly double team move by the Young Dragons on Shannon out of the corner. A 450 by Courageous, and another pinfall's broken up. Rey goes for a Bronco Buster, but gets the ultimate trip to Dick Kick City. Rey comes back, almost slips off the top rope, hits a springboard leg drop onto Moore for he and Kidman to win. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5. Another very short blink and you miss it match, but this one's just spot, 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 spot. No time to breathe, no time to sell or register anything, but at least the stuff we saw was exciting. Mr. McMahon here again, but this time he's interrupted by Trish Stratus, who's his on-air mistress at the time. Trish brings in some champagne to celebrate, but Vince would rather smooch. In a rematch from Greed the previous week, Shane Helms defends his newly won Cruiserweight Championship against the man he beat for it, Chavo Guerrero Jr. The action's fast and furious to begin. Helms with the first big strikes, but Chavo ejects Shane to get the advantage. Chavo goes for a superplex, but Shane drops him on the face and hits a top rope sunset flip for a 2 count. Shane with a big dive off the top, but Chavo answers back with a big T-bone suplex. Shane goes for his sugar smack super kick, reverses a reverse DDT attempt, gets the super kick off. Chavo flips out of the vertebreaker, goes for a brainbuster, but Shane gets the vertebreaker in anyway and drops Chavo to win and retain his championship. I give it 2 stars out of 5. Again, not nearly enough time given to these guys. After what I saw in their title match at Greed and how much I loved that match, for them to go from that to this and all the matches being so short is a bit of a downer. But I will say, again, the time that they used effectively. I think it was some great athleticism. Booker T with some thoughts on holding both the championships. It's kind of hard to make out what he's saying, though, due to some audio issues. Says it's the end of a chapter, but the book of Booker Man has many more pages left, and boy, he wasn't kidding. Back at the WWF home base, Michael Cole C blocks Mr. McMahon. What about all the wrestlers in WCW who may never work again, he asks. Vince is like, what about your job security, pal? Like you're going to work here for another 20 plus years? Fat chance. Well, last week on Nitro, the team of Mike Awesome and Lance Storm beat the tag team champs in a non-title match, so here's the rematch for the belts as Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire defend against Team Canada. Palumbo starts out strong, but Storm and Awesome use some double teaming to cut him off. Storm and Chuck with a sequence in the corner ending in a double down. Awesome and O'Haire each tag in. A do-si-do spot doesn't pay off for the champions, though. Mike goes the Awesome bomb on Palumbo, but Chuck slips out, hits the jungle kick, a Shanton bomb onto Awesome, and the champions retain. I give it 1 star out of 5. Again, a very quick match, not much to it, but I will say I think I actually enjoyed the tag title match at Greed against Totally Buffed more than this one, because even though, like I mentioned in my Greed review, that was the result of Luger and Bagwell just being pissy about the finish of the match, they went to business for themselves, that was still more entertaining than what we saw in this match on Nitro, because at least it was just like the shock factor of Palumbo and O'Haire winning that way. They should have ran with that and just had Palumbo and O'Haire win in similar fashion tonight. Shawn Stasiak takes on Bam Bam Bigelow in their third match in 2 weeks. Stasiak beat Bigelow at Greed, then Bam Bam got the win back one night later on Nitro, then upped the ante for their rubber match, saying if Bam Bam wins again, he gets to draw a tattoo on Stasiak. Stacy Keibler's not here to dance with these college drunks. She's here to introduce the Mecca of manhood. Bam Bam comes in with his toolkit and the match is on. The first part of the match is all Bam Bam. Shawn goes for a top rope crossbody but eats all the shit. Bigelow with the top rope headbutt looks to have it won, but Stacy's on the apron to distract the referee. Bam Bam goes for greetings from Asbury Park, but Stacy grabs the legs. Stasiak hits the neckbreaker to win. No tats for Stasiak, but he is the only heel who wins tonight, so good for him. I'm going to give this one 0 stars out of 5. Even though I like the Stasiak gimmick right now, unfortunately, there's less to this match than there was at their match at Greed, and that one wasn't very good either. Back in McMahon land with Commissioner William Regal sporting the cool new WrestleMania X7 jersey. Regal asks if Vince is sure that he wants to buy WCW. I mean, it's not run very well. They allow drug problems to run rampant there. Vince says, no worries, pal. Boy, it sure is unsettling that Vince spends all these segments just burying the shit out of WCW. It's almost like he doesn't want some hypothetical separate brand to eventually succeed.
I mean, we've had to do some crazy things, Steve Regal, including putting your ass over on TV.
The last challenger to Scott Steiner's reign, DDP, has a video message about the end of WCW. Says he's grateful that a kid from the Jersey Shore could become a multiple-time world champion. Says that anything's possible if you work hard enough for it. Thanks the fans and his wife Kimberly for believing in him, helping him live his dream. It's time to take it to another level, and boy, if he only knew which level the WWF was making him descend to. We get a brief video package highlighting many of the past WCW and NWA world champions and Roddy Piper for some reason. In a rematch from Greed for those brand spanking new Cruiserweight Tag Team Championships, primetime Elix Skipper and Kid Romeo defend against Rey Mysterio and Kidman. Romeo comes out to his third or fourth dubbed theme on the network since his debut. The champs jump the challengers, the bell rings. Nice gory special into a dropkick by Kidman and Rey. Elix throws Romeo off the top and onto Kidman, who also takes an alley-oop powerbomb. Romeo goes for a missile dropkick, but Kidman intercepts him. Hot tag to Rey and Skipper, and Mysterio's a house of fire. Rey and Romeo go tumbling out of the ring. Rey's back in. Big forearm to Skipper. Kidman goes downstairs and Rey up with the Bronco Buster. Romeo back in the ring, but Rey powerbombs him. A springboard headbutt, but Skipper breaks it up. Elix with a cool electric chair straightjacket drop. Kidman goes the play of the day / the overdrive / shit move, but Kidman counters it and hits the Kid Crusher to win. Kidman and Mysterio become the second and last ever Cruiserweight Tag Team Champions. I give it 2 stars out of 5. You know, I liked a lot of the innovative stuff we saw in terms of offense in this match, but it feels very similar to what we saw in the qualifying match earlier, which is like spot, 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 spot. No time to really breathe. I will say, though, I think that it's the ending that people wanted to see, though. I think that what we saw at Greed with the heels winning, kind of a swerve in a way, but I think it kind of artificially lengthens the feud to this point here where the good guys win in the end. Sting is back and he's in a room full of bats. He accepts Ric Flair's challenge and says the only thing that's certain about Sting is that nothing is certain. I feel like I heard him say that in AEW recently. Another spring breakout montage, and there's Vince McMahon again. The simulcast is impending, and in our main event of the evening, it's Ric Flair versus Sting in a match that was personally requested by Vince McMahon. It's Sting's first match back in WCW since the Millennium Final in Germany back in November. Also, these two wrestled at the very first Nitro in '95 for the US title. And there's Ric Flair wearing a shirt again. Boy, you hate to see it. These two are just playing all the hits here. Picture in your mind what a Ric Flair Sting match would look like in highlight form, and that's kind of what you get here. It's almost like a sparring match with these two smiling and laughing as they're working each other. Starts out with some headlocks, some shoulder tackles, Flair with some chops in, but Sting fights back, hits a hip toss and a drop kick. The corner punches by Sting, the Flair flop, Flair with the low blow, gets some more chops in the corner. Sting comes back with a Beal off the top turnbuckle, but Flair cuts him off yet again. The figure 4 is applied, but the Stinger rolls over. Sting gets hyped, throws Flair into the corner, and he doesn't get all that flip though. A superplex by Sting into the Scorpion Deathlock. Flair taps out immediately. Sting and Flair with some mutual respect shown between the two of them, and that's the last match on WCW Nitro. I give it 1.5 stars out of 5. Like every other match on this show tonight, these two are just victims to the times they're given, but hey, these two had the most to work with at like a whopping 7 minutes and change. Ooh, they had so much time to work with here. So yeah, these two have had far better matches than this one. But like I mentioned in my Greed review about Flair and Dusty Rhodes facing off for the first time in a long time, like seeing them square off in this ring here to bookend the first Nitro and the last Nitro, you could argue Steiner and Booker T could be the main event for this this one. But there's nothing more appropriate, in my opinion, than to have Nitro go out with a bang, so to speak, and have it end with Sting and Flair, these two stalwarts of WCW, in the ring one last time. I mean, that's the poetic way to end it. I think that was the appropriate match to end it on. But there's almost no time to appreciate that moment as we suddenly cut away to Vince McMahon and the simulcast begins in Cleveland, Ohio. Vince says the show's being broadcast on TNN and TNN. He says he'll sign the deal at WrestleMania when Ted Turner himself shows up with a contract in the ring. Boy, wouldn't that have been something. Vince says he beat WCW all on his own. He did it all by his sweet little self. Woo! Says you gotta grab your competition by the throat and squeeze the life out of it. Great line there. Plugs his match with Shane at WrestleMania. Talks about what he could do with the WCW name and the tape library and its stars. Who should be part of this new WCW he spent the better part of the last 2 hours completely shitting on. He does some audience participation where, show of hands. What do you think of Hulk Hogan being there? Gets a pretty good pop. Lex Luger gets booed. Buff Bagwell with a huge pop. Booker T with a somewhat less huge pop. Cleveland loves some Scott Steiner. They want Goldberg. They want Sting. He says he wants to give all those WCW guys a piece of his mind, how he wished he could go down to the Redneck Riviera in Panama, Florida, and fire them all himself. He predicts the future by saying, WCW is buried. So we see Shane McMahon's face in the Titantron, and suddenly we realize he's not in Cleveland, Ohio. He's in Panama City, Florida. Shane, with his lovely turtleneck, says that Vince's ego got the best of him and says those famous words, the name on the contract does say McMahon, however the contract reads Shane McMahon. Shane has bought WCW from under his father's own nose. We get one last plug for WrestleMania and the rest of Raw that night. That's the show. What a twist! Watching that moment live was pretty damn surreal. In fact, just to be sure I wasn't dreaming, I was literally flipping back and forth between Raw and Nitro to see the simulcast, because I couldn't believe they could pull that off. And it was the twist of Shane McMahon coming in. I did not see that coming. I was getting already, Ted Turner's going to show up at WrestleMania 17 with the contract. But no, we get Shane McMahon coming out, and to further build up their feud, which I've said before on this channel, they didn't need to add Shane buying WCW to make this feud what it was. It was like last minute window dressing, but it really, in a way, it did add to the angle, because it was one last thing of Shane finally, getting one over on his old man in the days before Mania 17. And man, when Shane buying WCW like that in the storyline, it sets up all these fantastical things in fans' head. Again, we really didn't get much of what we were hoping for out of this invasion thing. That's a story for a whole other time. But Shane coming in there and ending Nitro and buying WCW was an all-time moment. Like, that's one of the greatest Nitro and greatest Raw moments all rolled into one. And you can't get that kind of unpredictability. You can't get a swerve of that magnitude anymore. But yeah, seeing that moment live was just so surreal and so cool, and gives me goosebumps just thinking about it right now. Because again, it's one of those moments you'll really never see again. And how cool is that to have been a part of that, to witness that? And again, knowing where it's going to go in the future, it's a bit of a misnomer. But at the time, man, craziness. And that's the final Nitro in WCW's history. What a ride, man. And you know what? It's kind of disappointing that it ends not on something like WCW related, like thanks for all the memories, bye. It's just like Vince McMahon and Shane McMahon doing their thing. But you know what? Vince McMahon has earned the right, I think, to show up on Nitro and gloat. I'll tell you this, I've been watching every Nitro and Thunder and pay-per-view from like the end of 2000 up till this point for the purpose of these reviews. And I can say WCW was really beginning to get its act together. There was a more emphasis on the younger stars, especially the Cruiserweights. The storylines we saw were beginning to be a little less absurd and a little more coherent. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was a lot better than what we saw in the year 2000. It's easy to look and go, oh, haha, WCW is so shit, especially in that dark time of 2000, but they were really trying to get their act together once they got rid of all the riffraff and tried to really build up a strong, cohesive product. But unfortunately for them, it was too little too late. And before I go to my grade, I really briefly want to spend some time talking about Jamie Kellner, who was the head of Turner Broadcasting at the time they pulled the plug in WCW. I think he's painted in a far more negative light than he deserves. Because yes, the network really didn't want WCW on their programming by the end, but Ted Turner was always the stopping point. He always put his foot down and said, no, WCW stays because they were good to me and everything at the beginning of the Superstation. And then when the AOL Time Warner merger happened, the power structure changed, so Ted didn't have that power anymore. So you know that them cutting WCW was a long time coming. But I think that there's this myth out there that Jamie Kellner hated pro wrestling, and that's why he took pleasure in cutting WCW. WCW. I don't think that's the case at all, because if you look at some of his earlier interviews, like he says he grew up a wrestling fan. Like, I don't think he has a hatred for wrestling. There is a big dichotomy between what professional wrestling has to offer and what Turner wanted to do with their programming going forward. Like I said in the Greed review, the audiences for the two things did not mix. And so when you combine that and how much of a legal liability WCW was at the time, the numbers that they were dropping in the ratings, the money they were hemorrhaging, you know, all these things that went against them, and Ted Turner was the lone person to defend them, it's a corporate decision. I think if you put anyone in the position that Jamie Kellner was in, that's a slam dunk choice to cut WCW for all the things they have. WCW did not have the autonomy that the World Wrestling Federation did and continues to have today. They're not owned by some larger company, so WCW was a brand or was an arm of the Turner Empire. And in the corporate world, if things don't make money and if things don't do the way you want to project them, you cut them. And so I understand why people were sad and upset that WCW was cut. I don't like it either. I wish WCW got to last. I wish we got to see what they would do with that restructuring and that reboot with the Big Bang pay-per-view. I wanted to see that really badly, but we didn't get that. And I think if you look back at the history of WCW and how it was mismanaged for all those years, it's the fault stems with that past, all those knives in the back, so to speak. But Jamie Kellner, he was the final blow, but I don't think that all the blame should be put on him. And now, for the first time in the history of the Classic Pay-Per-View Review, I am reviewing and now grading a classic television show. Feels a bit different, but my grade for the final WCW Nitro is a B. Obviously, the historical significance of this show cannot be understated. I think that they did a really good job trying to have fans walk away on a happy note with the babyfaces winning all but one of their matches. Again, the setting and the ambiance of this final Nitro is so unique and so different. You got to show it some love for that. And even if we know what's going to happen with the invasion angle months from now, the moment of Shane McMahon becoming the new owner of WCW is just a huge watershed moment in professional wrestling history, storytelling history in wrestling, and that absolutely cannot be discounted. But the show wasn't perfect because, like I said, the matches were all way too short and there was just way too much Vince McMahon. If you kept it to just like the opening spiel, my hands, and then the simulcast at the end, and then one, maybe two backstage bits with Vince, I think that would have been a fine proportion of things. But no, they went to Vince after every single match. We had to see what Vince McMahon was doing. And that just kept, like, you know, if you took maybe 3 or 4 of those bits away, you could have added some time to some of those title matches, or you could have had some segments like, here's the history of Nitro and stuff. But nope, it's Vince doing his victory dance all over the show, and I guess he earned it. But at the same time, it did kind of take away from the overall show. If you want to play a role in determining which shows I look at, be they good, bad, or somewhere in between, pay-per-view or otherwise, go to patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret, become a $10 backer or above, and you'll have the chance to nominate classic shows for me to review. You know what? We're almost done with the month of January, and I apologize there's been no Royal Rumble themed stuff happening so far this month. I got to end the month on something Rumble related, right? So the next review I'm doing is kind of a newer classic, if that makes any sense. It's only 11 years old, folks. I'm talking about the Royal Rumble 2010. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.